Today on the what's called the Iddhipada, which is the 4 bases of power in the early Buddhist canon. And last time I've been speaking about sensing into what is not yet manifest through our capacity to be in relationship with our whole being. Like hearing and sensing and seeing with every part of quote unquote me. These, inner ears, inner eyes, which seem to show up in my whole body, as though my body becomes my ears and my eyes. I'm more here and at the same time also more everywhere. So this kind of quite mysterious experience, which is difficult, to put into words, that is a way of connecting with present moment experience without giving it a concept. And, through giving it a concept, we usually, lock things down. And if we want to connect to a deeper knowing through a more authentic relationship with the planet and the biosphere and its self-regulating intelligence, we need to be willing to experiment and try on new ways of looking at our situation. And I think, that's what we are doing here on those Wednesdays, to really look beyond concepts. Look at who am I, where am I, and how is it? And, one way how this willingness to experiment can be put into words is the Buddha's teaching on the 4 Iddhipada, the 4 bases of spiritual strength and power. And we can find this list in the early Buddhist canon, and it features as a component of the 37 Bodhibhakya Dhammas, in case you've heard that concept. The 37 factors of awakening, which are the foundation of the Theravada way, of laying out the teachings. And the word Iddhipada is a compound term composed of Iddhi, which means power or potency, and Pada, which means base, basis, or constituent. And this is a list of 4 qualities of expression of energy we all have in seed form. And I'm now going to screen share in an overview, and I have also put the same into the chat. You can download it from there if you wish. Because we're gonna, now for a few sessions, gonna work with this list. So here it is, the 4 bases of spiritual strength and power, Iddhipada. And I'm just gonna shortly go over those 4 now. So the first one is Chanda in Pali, and we can translate it as vision, intention, enthusiasm, interest, noticing what has value for us. And it can be, linked up with the archetype of the lover, falling in love with something. What does the heart yearn for? So it's a kind of a passion. It's a powerful heart quality. And then, once that has been established, what do we yearn for, then the next step would be effort. In Pali, virya, to put in energy, endurance, courage, to fulfill that yearning. And that would be the warrior or warrioress archetype. And that's the decision to go for it. And then if we go for it, then the next expression of energy would be integration, to create order, to sustain, to administer what has meaning for us, and in the Pali language that is going to be chitta, mind, the big picture, that's the king or queen archetype, and it's more like a marathon, to really try to establish what has value for us. And then once that, has happened or is happening, then the last one comes in investigation, Vimamsa in the Pali language, that is, asking, does it work? And then fine-tuning, adjusting, problem-solving, rebalancing, and that would be the archetype of the magus, the magician. So that's those 4 patterns of energy: application, vision, effort, integration, and investigation. And they, need to work together in order for anything to happen. So now I'm gonna stop the screen share, and please feel free to download the document from the chat. And these 4 patterns of energy application, they apply to all circumstances, to meditation as well as otherwise, any worldly project, which we try to manifest, we have to go through those same stages. It's a pattern of unfolding, and we can, see those stages at least rudimentary in all things we are doing. And everything that has happened before has led us to where we are right now. And then, there's the question, why are some people able, to manifest their vision in the most difficult circumstances? Where people would give up usually. What is the secret, And the secret is not willpower alone, but a sincerity of the heart. The heart wish to awaken and find one's place in the vast scheme of things in order to benefit oneself and others. So that is the most powerful motivation, and it's, in Buddhism, it's called the Bodhisattva aspiration. There's a very deep source of motivation for unlocking the power of true practice. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is on record for having said, awakening does not happen without sincere motivation. Awakening does not happen without sincere motivation, and that can be very painful, to really stay connected with one's deep motivation and not give up if it doesn't immediately happen. I can look at my own life, and I've felt a motivation, to find my place in the vast scheme of things and be of benefit to others when I was, very young, when I was, maybe like 5-6 years old. And then again and again, it came back to me, and to stay connected with that yearning wasn't easy, because it guided me to go into places which were very scary for me, and lonely also, But now I'm so glad I stuck it out, So this list of the 4 Iddhipada is these 4 different expressions of motivation, patterns, facets of harnessing energy, of harnessing strength, of harnessing effort. And we need all 4 to make something happen and to sustain it. Not just to make it happen, but to sustain it and to troubleshoot it so it can be adjusted. Because a vision, becomes conscious, and then, we manifest it, and then circumstances change, and there needs to be adjustments made in order to stay on course, in order to stay in the flow, so to say. So it's an energetic turning towards our experience, with that kind of wish, I want this to happen. And then also knowing, it's not just up to us, but it's the way, how we are attuning to the energy flow and to what is possible, and then harness that and direct it towards that vision, which has become clear maybe in a flash, either through, meeting somebody, reading something, being in a certain location. I mean, there's so many different ways, how that vision can become conscious, and then really staying with it. And the first and the third of the Iddhipada are heart qualities, vision and integration. Vision is more like a passionate heart, and integration is more like a heart of devotion. So melting and softening resistance in ourselves towards what is seen. And Iddhipada number 2 and number 4, which is effort and investigation, it's more like a wisdom quality, a cutting through of limitations. And effort is more like strength of cutting through, and investigation is more precision. So melting, embracing, softening, and cutting through. Both approaches are needed at different times. And to know the difference, that's, what we learn through trial and error, really. And the classic definition in the Pali Canon for the Iddhipada is concentration of, the first one would be concentration of desire, accompanied by formations of striving and effort. And the second one would be concentration of energy, accompanied by formations of striving and effort, and so on. And the next one is concentration of mind, and then concentration of investigation. So those 4 Iddhipada. And over the next sessions, I'm gonna go through them in pairs, so that we can become more conscious, what is our default mode, our preferred mode, and what do we need to develop. Not in order to fix or save anything or anyone, but in order to open and to sense into what is needed. So an open-hearted and open-minded approach to participate in the human experience as fully as we can. And this ancient list, of the Iddhipada is really very applicable for us today, and especially, for the work we are trying to do together to, to adjust and attune to what is really wanting to be known at this time in history, where the old cultural paradigm is showing more and more cracks and is falling apart, and where there's a lot of confusion about how to respond. And the approach is, as long as we don't know what to do, we need to listen, we need to attune, and then, step by step, walking into the openings. And today I have brought again a poem from the book I read last time, The First 3 Women. And I think that applies quite well to the theme of today. And the poem is on page 7, and it's called Tissa the Third. And it goes like this. Why stay here in your little dungeon? If you really want to be free, make every thought a thought of freedom. Break your chains, tear down the walls, then walk the world, a free woman or a free man. Why stay here in your little dungeon? If you really want to be free, make every thought a thought of freedom. Break your chains, tear down the walls, then walk the world a free woman. And this poem is based on the Enlightenment poems by the early Buddhist nuns, the bhikkhunis who lived at the time of the Buddha. So with this encouragement, we can shift now into meditation. Please, find a posture you can sustain for about 40 minutes. In sensing into the gravitational embrace of the planet. Which is calling for our attention at this time with all of these different things happening around the globe, which we call climate chaos. But it's a way of communicating. And we need to listen. So, coming into the body and sensing the hardness where the body meets the cushion, the chair. That's a direct experience of earth element, hardness and structure. So, and with the in-breath, sensing into the quality of earth element, the fact, that we are held in place and given a foundation for being this body. And with the out-breath, just letting go of any tension, striving, or tiredness, or whatever you are bringing here today. So breathing up the stability and the vastness of the earth and letting go of any tiredness or stress. And just allowing everything to be what it is. Meditation isn't about manipulating our experience, but it's about really noticing what is, how is it, and coming out from under all of those cultural concepts, which are assumptions. And we can see that very clearly at this time, where a paradigm which was very powerful for some time is just falling apart right now. And we can see, oh my gosh, that was only an idea. And it lasted only that long, and here we are. There's nothing bad about it or blameworthy about it, but it behooves us really to turn towards it. It's the only way for opening to the next paradigm, which is also going to be impermanent. So sensing into the aliveness of the energy body, the vibrancy, which doesn't end at the body but fills limitless space around the body as well, just in a different frequency. And just, the capacity to be there with our experience without any expectations, or if there are expectations, to just be conscious of the expectations too. They're just thoughts. And then maybe also noticing, that maybe there's a sense of wanting to get it right. So letting go of that as well. Or maybe there's some worry, you have in your life which always comes back into your mind. Letting go of that as well. And really connecting with the earth, the soil from which we have emerged through eating, drinking, and breathing. And that's our learning ground for this incarnation, at least. And it calls us, to engage because of the huge stresses the biosphere is under at this point in history. And she needs our attention. And working with the 4 Iddhipada to get a handle on how that can look like, what that can look like. That application of energy. And really touching in our motivation, which is at the root of our wish to practice well. A kind of longing, yearning for something. And trying to really become clear what that is. As a quality, not necessarily as a final product, but a quality we wish to embody more fully in our lives. And acknowledging, yourself for that very noble, longing. Which you're obviously in touch with, otherwise you wouldn't show up here today. This is Chanda, a wholesome wish. And if the mind wanders off into thinking about something, just gently bringing it back again to sensing the body sitting and breathing in and breathing out. The vitality, the aliveness, which is a result of eating, drinking, and breathing the planet, and participating as a small cell in a vast body. And this vast body is undergoing a process, and we are part of that process, if we know it or not. And learning to listen to that process from the ground up. Listening to what we belong, always already. And and finding safety in that purpose by returning back to that yearning, to that guiding star again and again, when we feel lost. And trusting that on a sensing level, without knowing, how it will look like as a manifestation, but just trusting the guidance of that yearning. That's, the urge to evolve, to respond to the calling of the earth, with a willingness to be informed. And tearing down this dungeon made out of concepts which are no longer serving, but we have become a imprisonment of modernity, which is addicted to fossil fuels and which is completely lost in extracting attention in order to make more profits, in order to extract more. It's kind of hopeless stuck. So it's a stuck record, which is leading us into great danger as a species. And, we take many other species with us. We need to stop. So again and again, coming back to the aliveness, where is it in the body? Where can you connect with it? Come back to that. and allowing that to guide us. And if you get a little bit fuzzy, just putting a bit of effort into your posture, sitting upright and expressing in your posture your willingness to really be here and know. And you can also open your eyes if that is helpful. So to listen and sense, see, quote unquote, with your whole body. To how fully embedded these bodies are in the vast body of the planet. To really experience that directly, that is the medicine for this paradigm shift, which is underway, and we can sense it in our bones that there's no way back. But we need to continue to allow that shift to move through us and change us from the ground up. And not have too high expectations that there's going to be like an amazing experience, but it can be just a very very refined attention might be needed to really stay connected with that aliveness, and that cultivation of refinement and capacity for attention is what is asked for, because we are used to be bombarded by so much on our screens. So our minds have become very coarse through this extraction which is happening on our capacity for attention. And to wean ourselves off from that addiction to screens, it's not easy. And a certain amount of that is needed in order to live a contemporary life, but there might be areas, where we can cut back and fast. And that's really one area of adjustment which is very important. The body knows how to remember that it has emerged from the biosphere. And it knows how to regulate itself in relation to that knowing, if we give it the space. If we allow that dynamic, through putting causes and conditions in place so it can kick in and do its natural work. Especially at a time when there's such a shift happening again. In our consciousness as a species. a reorientation is happening because it's no longer working the old ways. Of trying, to dominate the planet with science and technology. It's not working. And, we can't go back to the ways of being, when we were still living as hunter-gatherers, we were relating to the planet as a giving parent. And then, we went into trying to supplicate the planet with religion and science. And then more and more, moving into trying to dominate and manipulate through technology. And now we're at the end of that one. And now what's the next one? The next one is a conscious participation. And we are on that threshold now, where more and more people wake up to that. And now we need to learn the ropes for that participation. And that's what we're trying to do. And with the support of the Buddha's teaching, to handle our minds and our hearts. Because a great challenge, to leave behind old ways of doing things. Without a strong practice, it's difficult, if not impossible. Because we always shut down again and again out of fear and confusion. And, we learn to be with the confusion and to allow it to clarify through acceptance and allowing us to be in the dark and not shutting down, and to be in the dark together. And with that vision, with that longing of the heart for finding one's place in the vast scheme of things and benefiting others and including ourselves. And trusting, that an acceptance of limits is actually really the best way for imagination and creativity to be empowered again. Because imagination loves limits. it can only come forth if it is, constrained, and then that longing is basically pushing into that which is not yet manifest. And artists, can, for example, express that longing on scale. That's why art is a very important support now in this shift. To help us all, to imagine that which is not yet manifest. And this way of imagining is a bridge for our nervous systems to renew and updating the capacity for cultural imagination, which can be then brought, into society. And art is often the portal for that. And not necessarily, art in the sense of painting and singing and dancing. Also, it's important, but also art in the sense of, permaculture, for example, of in an artful way relating to the biosphere. A way which is informed by respect and reverence. Just gonna share the poem one more time. Tissa the Third. Why stay here in your little dungeon? If you really want to be free, make every thought a thought of freedom. Break your chains, tear down the walls, then walk the world a free woman.